reward for taking risk. We are also, like for example, very tolerant towards failure relative to Japan. So risk taking is actually less risky in Europe because we are more tolerant towards failure. Actually, failure, like a saying in Europe, is like a failure is a step towards learning. So it's seen as basically a step to come closer to the truth. Where in Japan there is generally speaking, there is a more conservative attitude, less forgiving when it comes to failure. Things need to be successful, and there is a tendency towards more incremental thinking. Kaizen is a production system that is based on constant improvement, on constantly improving the process and creating excellent quality. So that's less fundamental and more incremental. Okay, individualism. In European culture, I stands at the front. That's where everything starts. Critical thinking is also based on finding the truth yourself by asking critical questions. It also underlines the importance of the individual. So you as an individual, you need to find the truth. You need to come closer to the truth. So it's your own duty to find it. I am the center of the universe, basically. Whereas in Japan, it's more conformism. And looking at the history, that's also logical. It's more the group plays a more important role. So it's not I that is the center of the universe. It's more the society or the family or the company that plays a central role in Japan. Very simple example is that the way that business cards work. In a business card in Europe, the individual will be mentioned first, so the name of the individual. Whereas in Japan, it's the company that is first, and the individual is a representative of that company. So the company is more important. Why is this? Also important, again, in negotiations, this will have an impact. In Europe, the negotiator will usually take a personal commitment towards the deal. Of course, he will have to settle this with this organization, but it's basically the negotiator who takes responsibility and who also expects the other side to take responsibility. In a culture where it's more about conformism and where the company plays a more important role than the individual, this could lead to suboptimal outcomes in negotiation. Then there is a difference between managers and influencers. And in Europe, there is more tendency for the manager to be the decision maker. So as a salesperson, you always need to go to the manager, to the general manager, the CEO, if you want a decision to be made quickly. So salespeople will always try to get an appointment with the CEO. And preferably first appointment should be with the CEO, because if he is okay, then he will make the rest of the organization and get in line. So it's more of a top-down decision-making process. Whereas in Japan, basically, it's a culture of pre-meetings, of trying to get buy-in and influence different groups of people, because there is not a clear top-down decision-making process. A process is basically carried bottom-up, and so it's less of a top-down management, more about influencing. Europeans tend to be impatient. Americans tend to be even more impatient, especially when it comes to brokering deals. Time is money, so let's not waste time. Let's go through this process step by step, but preferably as quickly as possible. We have quarterly figures to make, so they tend to be impatient, which is also kind of explained from the fact that like relationships are important if you are in a context based society. So in Japan we have and that's actually the second point. We live in a society where the context is important, where implicit things are important, where relationships matter. In Western society, it's more about contracts, legal system. Because our legal system is well organized, just like Japan, by the way, but our legal system is organized, we tend to rely on it. So it doesn't really matter how good the relationship is. If there is a conflict, the law will rule, the contract will tell us what to do. So we can go quickly, not having to worry too much about building relationships, because we can always fall back on what's written in the contract. So as long as the contract is solid, we can build any kind of deal on it. Basically, that's the approach. So that will lead to hasty negotiations, trying to broker a deal as quickly as possible, which will not always sit well with a Japanese negotiator, and even worse in Chinese negotiation. Then language obviously is a problem. Based on our history, based on the influence that Europe had worldwide, they managed to plan and create a global language, which is English. And this is a big advantage for Europeans, obviously, because English is quite close. It's a Latin-based language, and this is close to all the European languages. They all have Latin as the base. That makes English much easier to pick up and learn for Europeans than for Japanese people. So that language gap that exists, and that is just a handicap, a higher hurdle for Japanese people to get over. That it's more of a person-to-person negotiation and versus a organization-to-organization negotiation. So as you can see, there are a lot of gaps. The way that people think, the way that they value stability, the way that they are patient, impatient, the way that they put themselves in the center versus the organization, the way that they are tolerant for risk-taking or averse for risk-taking, whether they are managing top-down or whether they are more influencing and need to create consensus throughout the organization. The way that they are trying to make everything explicit and basically make everything a topic of discussion, versus a culture where a lot of things are implicit, a lot of things are not named, do not need to be named because they are common sense. If you try to build a bridge between two cultures that have such a big gap that you are likely in for a big challenge. Having said that there are big gaps between Europe and Japan. What can we do in order to bridge those gaps that exist between Japan and Europe?